theme,
Okay.
and they're all looking for a good story. They want something sensational, something with bite, as they say.
Yeah.
But Stephen refuses to give them what they want.
Huh.
Instead, he offers them this enigmatic parable, which they completely fail to understand.
It's like he's deliberately challenging their expectations, refusing to play by their rules. And it's also interesting that he's telling a story about unfulfilled promise and the fall of a powerful symbol. Is he suggesting that the newspaper men, with their focus on superficial stories and sensationalism, are also contributing to the stagnation of Ireland?
That's a very astute observation.
Hmm.
And it connects back to that theme we discussed earlier
Right.
about the contrast between action and rhetoric.
Yeah.
Stephen is a young man who's full of ideas and passion,
Hmm.
but he's frustrated by the limitations of language and the way that words can be twisted and manipulated. He wants his words to have real meaning and impact,
Yeah.
not just be empty sound bites.
It makes me think about how easy it is to get caught up in the noise and distractions of everyday life, to lose sight of what truly matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge that I think we all face, whether we're living in Joyce's Dublin or in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes Ulysses so relevant, even today.
Right.
It's speaking to these universal human experiences of searching for meaning, grappling with identity, and trying to find our place in a world that can often feel chaotic and overwhelming.
Okay, so we've talked about the chaos, the contrasts between action and rhetoric, the Mary and Martha motif, and Stephen's powerful parable.
Right.
Is there anything else we need to cover before we wrap up our deep dive into Aeolus?
I think it's worth circling back to this idea of the wind itself as a symbol.
Okay.
Throughout the episode, Joyce uses the wind to represent a lot of different things.
Hmm.
Empty rhetoric, the forces of fate, the distractions that blow us off course. It's almost like the wind is a character in itself, a force that's shaping the lives of the characters, whether they realize it or not.
That's a great point. And it's not just the literal wind, right? There's also this sense of things constantly being in motion, of ideas and conversations swirling around,
Yeah.
but never quite landing anywhere. It creates this feeling of instability and uncertainty, which I think is really central to the episode's overall mood.
Exactly. And this sense of instability is reflected in the way that the episode is structured. Instead of a clear linear narrative,
Right.
we get this series of fragmented scenes and conversations that jump around in time and space. It's like Joyce is deliberately disorienting us,
Yeah.
making us feel the same kind of confusion and frustration that the characters are experiencing.
I love how Joyce plays with form and structure to mirror the themes he's exploring. It's so innovative. But it also makes it challenging to read, at least on the first go-around. There's so much going on, so many layers of meaning to unpack.
It's dense.
Do you have any advice for listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by Aeolus?
I would say don't be afraid to get lost in the chaos. Embrace the confusion. Let yourself be swept away by the wind. And then, when you come back for a second or third reading, start to look for those patterns and connections, those moments of clarity that emerge from the storm.
That's great advice. It's like learning to surf.
Yeah.
You're going to get knocked down a few times, but eventually you'll start to find your balance and ride the waves.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to understand everything on the first try.
Right.
Part of the joy of reading Joyce is the process of discovery, of slowly unraveling the layers of meaning and appreciating the sheer brilliance of his writing.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the chaos, the symbolism, the biblical allusions, and the deeper themes of Aeolus. But I'm wondering, what does it all mean? What's the takeaway message for us as readers?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think, like with most great literature, there's no one easy answer. But if I had to sum it up, I would say that Aeolus is ultimately a meditation on the challenges of finding meaning and purpose in a world that's constantly bombarding us with distractions and empty rhetoric.
I love that. It's like Joyce is saying, hey, pay attention. Don't get swept away by all the noise. There's real meaning to be found.
Right.
But you have to be willing to look for it.
And I think that's a message that's more relevant than ever in today's world.
Right.
We're constantly being bombarded with information, with advertising, with social media. It's easy to get lost in the whirlwind and lose sight of what truly matters.
So Aeolus is not just a story about a day in the life of Dublin in 1904.
Yeah.
It's also a story about our own lives, our own struggles to find meaning and purpose in the midst of chaos.
Exactly. And I think that's why Aeolus continues to resonate with readers over a century after it was written.
Right.
It speaks to something deep within us, something that transcends time and place.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I wanted to revisit something you mentioned earlier about the Mary and Martha motif.
Yeah.
We talked about how it relates to Bloom and the women in his life,
Hmm.
but I'm wondering if it has any broader significance. Could it be connected to those larger themes of action and rhetoric that we were discussing?
That's an excellent question, and I think you're onto something there. Remember, Mary represents a more contemplative, receptive way of being,
Right.
while Martha represents a more active, outward-focused approach.
Yeah.
And in a way, this mirrors the distinction between rhetoric and action.
I see what you mean. Rhetoric is all about words and appearances, while action is about actually getting things done, making a real impact in the world.
Precisely. And perhaps Joyce is suggesting that both of these approaches are important,
Yeah.
that there needs to be a balance between contemplation and action, between the inner world of thoughts and ideas and the outer world of tangible results.
That's a fascinating insight. It's like he's saying that we need both Mary and Martha in our lives, both the thinkers and the doers.
Yeah,
And maybe Aeolus, with its chaotic blend of words and actions, is a reflection of that very tension.
that could be.
It makes you wonder if Joyce is subtly suggesting that true progress comes from harmonizing these two forces, the contemplative and the active.
Mhm.
But hey, maybe that's something for our listeners to ponder.
It's definitely food for thought. And speaking of food for thought, there's another really subtle detail in Aeolus that Chris Wright pointed out in his analysis that I think speaks to this idea of balance.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
It's the way Joyce describes Bloom's lunch. Remember, Bloom is constantly being interrupted and distracted while he's trying to eat.
Yeah.
He's bombarded with conversations, with noise, with the demands of the people around him.
Yeah, I remember that. It's like he can never quite enjoy his meal in peace. There's always something pulling him away from it.
Exactly. And this detail might seem insignificant at first, but it actually speaks volumes about Bloom's character and his place in the world.
Okay.
He's a man who's constantly striving for balance, for harmony, but the forces around him keep throwing him off kilter.
That's a really interesting observation. It's like even the simple act of eating becomes a struggle for Bloom,
Right.
a metaphor for his larger struggle to find peace and fulfillment in a world that's constantly in motion.
And it's not just Bloom who's affected by this sense of imbalance. Think about all the characters in Aeolus who were overindulging in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
You have the newspapermen who are drunk on words and gossip, the politicians who are intoxicated by their own power, even Stephen, who's lost in his own world of intellectual pursuits.
Wow, I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
But you're right, there's this sense of excess and imbalance that permeates the entire episode. It's like
Yeah.
everyone is trying to fill some kind of void,
Mhm.
but they're going about it in all the wrong ways.
And perhaps that's another key takeaway from Aeolus.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of extremism, of getting so caught up in one aspect of life that we neglect all the others. It's a reminder that true fulfillment comes from finding that sweet spot, that harmonious balance between all the different forces that make us who we are.
That's a powerful message, and it definitely resonates with me. I think it's something we can all apply to our own lives, to strive for that balance between work and play, between thinking and doing, between our inner world and our outer world.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think it's a message that's particularly relevant in today's world where we're constantly being bombarded with information and distractions. It's easy to lose sight of that balance, to get swept away by the currents of modern life.
So Aeolus is not just a challenging chapter in a difficult novel. It's also a profound meditation on the human condition, on our eternal search for meaning and balance in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming.
And it's a testament to Joyce's genius that he's able to explore these complex themes in such a creative and engaging way. Even though Aeolus can be confusing and disorienting at times,
Right.
it's ultimately a deeply rewarding experience, one that leaves you with more questions than answers,
Yeah.
but also with a renewed appreciation for the power of language and the beauty of the human spirit.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. To our listeners, I hope this deep dive into Aeolus has given you some new insights and perspectives on this fascinating chapter. And if you're feeling inspired to tackle Ulysses yourself, don't be intimidated.
Great.
Embrace the challenge, take your time, and most importantly, enjoy the journey.
Happy reading.